saying to the people, you know, you got a tradition each year that we release a prisoner to you. Pilate thinks he's found a great way out of this mess. We're going to release a prisoner to you and pardon him. Who would you rather have? This Jesus who's done nothing wrong, and he picks a guy who ought to be a sure thing. Barabbas. This guy's a murderer. This guy's a thief. This is a guy everybody agrees ought to be off the streets. So he says to him, you want Jesus or Barabbas? How bad was it that night? They would choose a murderer. We want Barabbas to be freed rather than the innocent Jesus. A night where everything went wrong, where everyone and everybody turned against him. A time when no matter what he had done, it was all out the window now. Nobody remembered the healings. Nobody remembered the feedings. Nobody remembered the calming of the storm. Nobody remembered the walking on the water. Nobody chose to remember how just on Sunday of that week he had come into the town and they were all shouting out, Hosanna to the Son of David, praising him and honoring him. And now it's just dark all over. One strike after another. You may think you've had a rough day or a rough night or a rough week, but have you ever had this much happen to you? From people who you loved, people you had reached out to, people you cared for. Sometimes injustice is just there. Sometimes, no matter what we do, it's against us. And there will be times where you and I, when we try and be who we are, the world's going to work against us. We are children of God. We're to speak up for Him. We're to stand for Him. We're to shine His light. We are to be the people God called us to be. But we're going to find as time goes on, just like they did with Jesus, they're going to do with us. It may not be fair. It may not be right. But the world will soon turn against us more than it already has. What will we do then? Avoid being a victim of the darkness. Let's make it real clear here. They did Jesus wrong. It was awful how unfair, unjust everything was. It was awful how they lied about Him, how they stabbed Him in the back, how they denied Him and ran off on Him. All of that was bad. But never once did He consider Himself a victim. He knew why He was on this path. You and I need to take that mindset. If we find the world turning against us, if we find society at large, our government, etc., coming against us and telling us, you who are Christians, you who are believers, you no longer have these rights, what will we do? We can't just call ourselves victims. Why didn't Jesus cry out for His rights? Jesus had the right to a fair trial like any other person in the jurisdiction. Jesus had the right to a little bit of representation. There's somebody to speak up for Him. He was denied all of that. You know, here in Corpus Christi, I know sometimes they'll do arraignments in the evenings because they got a lot of prisoners and they want to kind of make sure they got the paperwork settled on the charges these guys and gals have and get them back in their jail cell. And they'll do that in the evening. But, you know, holding a trial at night that starts probably 10, 11, midnight. Boy, we don't do that, do we? That was against their law also. So many things they did wrong with Jesus. Why did He not cry out for His rights? Because there was a prophecy, Isaiah 53, verse 7, where it speaks of Jesus telling us, I'm sorry, I thought that verse was in there, that He was oppressed and He was afflicted, yet He opened not His mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so He opened not His mouth. You see, God knew in the prophecy given to Isaiah that the Son of Man, the Son of God, when He was brought to be for His tormentors, that there would be a great amount of pain there, and yet Jesus did not open His mouth. Why did He not cry out for His rights? Because He was to be the sacrificial lamb. There comes a point in time where when our rights are violated and they're working against us, we need to remember, you know, no amount of crying and bemoaning and protesting is going to do it. Jesus suffered silently, perhaps to leave us an example, to remind us this is part and parcel of what it means to be a follower of Him. This kind of opposition, this kind of injustice will come our way one day. Be prepared for it. He leaves us an example of suffering injustice when we're innocent. There may come a time where we need to defend America. I agree. We should defend America and take up arms. There may come a time when it comes to defending Christianity. You know what? Jesus will defend Himself. We will stand. We will let the chips fall where they may. They've already told us, we can't, that you have to bake a cake for a gay wedding if you're in business. They've told us already that you can't do this and that in a public school. They've already told us your message should be modified and turned down. They've told us so many things. We just have to keep on being who we are. Jesus was innocent of all the charges, and yet not at any time did He stop being who He was supposed to be. So we got to be, first off, consistent with our values. When we look back at chapter 22 and we look at verse 50, one of those disciples, we assume it's Peter, one of the other Gospels tells us that, he reached out and struck the high priest and cut off his right ear. Good thing he didn't cut his head. I guess that's what he was aiming for, but not being much of a warrior, he just got the ear. Well, what does Jesus do in verse 51? He says, permit even this. And He picks up the ear and He puts it back on and He heals the man. Jesus stayed consistent with who He was. He was a healer. Jesus is a man of peace, but we will see when we get to Revelation chapter 19, He clearly becomes a warrior. Jesus is not a pacifist. What He is saying when He says, permit even this, is it is time for this plan of God's to move forward. Permit this. Permit this arrest to happen. Permit this trial to commence. It's as awful as can be. I was just sweating drops of blood over it. But my value is this is the reason I came. And so let's heal this man. Yes, he's doing wrong. But in that strange way, his doing wrong is also God's plan. So He heals the man. Puts his ear back on. Stay consistent. When the world tries to shut us up, we've got to be who we are. And who we are people who proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. Who we are the people who, regardless of whatever laws they pass against it or whatever fines they impose on us, we've got to do what we're going to do. We have it in our church policy. We only do weddings between one man and one woman. If the world wants to fine us or whatever about that, they can send us the bill and we probably won't pay it. And let those chips fall where they may. We have to be consistent with our values. There are some things more important that we serve than our own personal self-comfort. Jesus could have stopped that arrest, but He didn't. He could have told His disciples, have at 'em, boys, you're outnumbered 2-1 anyway, but you're not very good with those swords, but it would have been over quick. But nonetheless, that's not what He did either. His values were to obey the will of the Father. He was to head to the cross. But at the same time, His value was to be a healer. To restore that which is broken, that which is wounded. And that's what He did in healing that man's ear. So stay consistent with who you are through all of these things. And then be conscious of your purpose. Matthew chapter 26, verse 56 tells us, all this was done. This is the end of Matthew's account of the arrest. All this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. The point is this. The arrest, the humiliations, the trials, all of these things were a fulfillment of what the path Christ was to walk upon. God said that His servant would come. God said His Messiah would come and would suffer. God said His servant would suffer at the hands of His friends, in the house of His friends. He said He would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Right down the line, God had predicted through His prophets all the stuff that was going to happen to Jesus Christ. And it began happening. And Jesus, conscious of His purpose, just stayed with it. There's an old poem I read somewhere that, lesser messiahs cry out for a free hand and a machine gun, but ours cried out, Father, forgive them. Lesser messiahs, in other words, would want revenge. You know, Jesus was being taunted upon that cross by one of the thieves who said, "Hey, if you're really the Son of God, why don't you get us down from here?"